It's my honor and privilege to introduce our guest today, Dr. Darryl Sink. We've invited him to spend time with us today because of his broad and deep expertise in performance-based training across a variety of media. During his hour with us, Dr. Sink will address the following topics: how DSA uses prototyping and usability testing to create instructor-led and online training, different levels of doneness for internal and client-facing prototypes, single subject testing. He'll share examples of DSA prototypes, and he's going to be answering your questions. I've already forwarded those questions that have appeared in the Lotus Notes database. Dr. Sink, we're delighted to have you with us today.
Thank you, Steve. Thank you very much. Welcome, everybody, to the presentation. You're basically taking what you've been working with in class, prototyping, and different levels of prototyping, and maybe moving that forward to the idea of how do you take a prototype of an instructional program and use it to test out that program so that you can make any types of revisions early on and move ahead with it. What I thought I would do at the hour we have together is to quickly go through some content related to trying materials out, in particular the first drafts or prototypes of a program. And by prototypes here, you know, in instruction, I think we tend to use this to mean it's a sample of what the program is going to look like, or it's a model of it. From putting that together and not only meeting with our clients and other stakeholders related to that model, including content experts, then we can move ahead to test it out with learners too, to make sure that it's working with the learning population. They're learning what it is that they were supposed to be able to do from the instructional program. So that's kind of the context of that, the idea of prototyping. I think of it like a sample of what the program's actually going to look like. And if it's e-learning, you know, can we create some functionality within that prototype so that the client and other stakeholders and even students can take a look at it and give us feedback for the improvement of the program. So that's the context from which I'm starting. Let me go into our first slide here, which is not coming. There he goes. Anytime we are testing something out, evaluating something, I always like to ask the question, so if we're evaluating something, and we're evaluating this prototype that's been created, that kind of thing, on learners, what's our purpose of the evaluation? And basically, there's sort of two purposes for evaluation, seems to me like. One called formative evaluation. You've probably already run onto that term in your instructional program there. But it's basically the idea of looking at something for the purpose of improving the instructional program in this case. So formative evaluation is for the improvement while it is being formed. That's where the formative word comes from, while a program is in its formation. Summative evaluation is the other type of evaluation, and we really do both throughout the entire process of designing and developing programs. Summative evaluation sums it up, it's looking to see is the program effective or not. But we actually make those decisions all the way along. For example, you might have a module that you make a summative decision on. You say, in consultation with content experts, you say, we don't even need this. We've kind of drafted it out, but it's not something that the content expert now thinks we need. And so we make a summative decision, which means that we're going to get rid of it. We summed it all and said we don't even need it. So we get it out of there. So you can see we have those kinds of decisions going on continuously, and that's kind of a hard thing to get until you practice it some. But the idea that we're doing formative and summative evaluation throughout the instructional design and development process, we're making decisions to improve something or decisions to continue on with it or not to continue on with it, and that's the summative one. In models for instructional design and development, and this happens to be the one that we use in our 3-day workshop from which most of the material I'm covering today comes from. We have a 3-day workshop called the Instructional Developer Workshop that we put on for business and industry and government and educational organizations too. And in that we show the model which is basically kind of like an ADDIE model or the Dick and Carey model because we do show testing, trying to come up with your criterion reference test that right after objectives. That's more Dick and Carey. We don't, the only part we don't have in here is much about implementation because that's something that each company or organization tends to do on their own. So we don't have much about that. But you do see the other 4 major areas: analysis, design and development, and evaluation. And what we're talking about today is down in the evaluation area. Can we take a prototype, learn from that prototype, feed it back, and improve our program? And that's called developmental testing. If that's new to you, it just means while it's developing, it's a form of formative evaluation. So that's what we're talking about, where you see the area of evaluation. You see developmental testing, and you see expert appraisal, like it sounds, is simply back to your content experts and other stakeholders to make sure your content is complete and accurate. All right, so let's go into developmental testing. One of your handouts is the actual module on developmental testing out of our workshop. And it's got on, there's the reason the page numbers seem a little funny. It says 263 as the page just past the cover that's got our objectives for this module and when, why, and who's involved in doing developmental testing. So on the next page, if you've got that handout, you'll find just a quick definition on page 265 out of our binder, or about the 4th page in your handout. Developmental testing is the process of trying out instructional prototypes on representative members of the target audience. Now, a couple key things there. It's representative members of the target audience. You remember just a moment ago I mentioned developmental testing and I mentioned expert appraisal. Expert appraisal is your content experts, or maybe it's a computer expert, it's a software expert, any kinds of other experts, not necessarily the target audience. But developmental testing is trying it out on representative members of the target population for the training. And we've said here a prototype or a model of it or your first running of it, that kind of thing, for the purpose of improving the program. Now, I have also included, and it's in our binder here on page 267 in your handout, which is about the 5th or 6th page. You see an article, it's reprinted from ISPI's Journal of Performance Improvement, that Jeannie Farrington wrote when she worked for us several years ago, on a concept that we got onto from a very large project right before I actually started our company. And it was a project in which we had 200 instructional modules that were being done for vocational schools in Saudi Arabia. And the challenge was that part of the process, and this is hallmark to good instructional design and development, was the tryout revision of the materials as they were being drafted. So what we did was I called up one of our tremendous associates and a famous name in this field, Harold Stolovich, was at the University of Montreal at that time. And I said, Harold, help me out here. We're going to be producing 200 modules in automotive and diesel mechanics for vocational schools in Saudi Arabia. And not only are we going to produce them, we need to try them out in English and then translate them, and they'll be tried out again in Saudi Arabia at a vocational school there. And that's where I was first introduced to something called single subject testing when it came to tryout and revision. And so Harold had been doing studies with his doctoral students. They had been running studies testing out how many, really the question was, how many people do you need to try something out on? And how does that relate to also how many cycles you go through of tryout and revision? And so they decided to test it out in its extreme. So what they set up were experiments where they had drafts or prototypes of instructional programs, and they took the same draft and tried it out with one student in one room, whether it was self-instructional or instructor-led, and in another room, the same version of the materials tested out on 15 to 20 people. They collected back the information from the tryout, and the kind of information they collected was, first of all, they gave them a test on the learning objectives, the criterion reference test. So a test on the learning objectives of the instructional program as soon as the training was over. Then they gave them a questionnaire to fill out. Then they verbally debriefed. They also collected any worksheets or anything like that, and they summarized what they found from the 15 or 20 students for the purpose of revision, what changes should be made, and that sort of thing. And they did the same thing with a single individual. They found something that was fabulous for us practitioners. And I'll just ask the question in a rhetorical way, what do you think they found? They found no significant difference in the quality of the information gotten from 15 to 20 people on the same version of an instructional program as they did from trying it out with one person from the target population. So what we're saying here is that you can get something very close to the same quality of information for the purpose of revision from trying it out with either one person or a very small group, say 3 or 4. Over time, I've found that I want to have maybe 3 or 4 people, but I don't want more than that, and I'll say in a minute why that is. So we ask for 3, anytime we're going to try out a prototype or a first version of an instructional program, we ask our clients for just 3 or 4 people. Now, if it is completely self-instructional, it makes pretty good sense. You can understand how you try it out with one person, maybe make some changes, try it out with another, make some changes, and try it out with another. But when it's group instruction, you may think, well, that's a little different, and don't we need 20 people? Well, what we ask for is 3 or 4. The reason I do that now from practicality sense, if we're only doing it with one person and that person's absent that day, didn't show up to work or something like that, then we've wasted our time. And also it does allow us to just see how 2 or 3 people reacted to the training as opposed to just one. The reason I don't want a very large group, and I really, really recommend this to you, is one that has to do with what happens when you get 15 or 20 people together to look at an instructional program or to go through an instructional program. I believe that they think it's showtime. I believe they think it's opening night as you would have if you were writing or designing a new play. And what we're really doing is a dress rehearsal more than an opening night. And since they come, when you bring 15 to 20 people together and they have that expectation because it's a large group, they expect the program to be very good. Also, management tends to show up at those in those runnings to see how your program's going. After all, you've maybe even called it a pilot. By the time you're calling it a pilot, you should have already tested out your program on very small groups if it's instructor-led, so that once you get to your pilot, where you do have maybe 15 or 20 people for instructor-led training, indeed, there's very little that needs to be changed about the program, and this helps to market your program. Now you got 15 or 20 people going back and saying, hey, what a great training program, you should go to it. If you run it for the first time with 15 or 20 people, you're bound to have problems. And those problems will get exaggerated by the students. no matter that you told them this is just a tryout, we're just testing our program, it doesn't matter what you say to them. When the group is large, they tend to go back and if you had many problems with the program, say that training wasn't very good, I wouldn't even go to it. So now you got 15 or 20 people going back and telling people the program's not any good. And maybe your changes weren't that hard to do. There was just some little procedure that got messed up, maybe an activity that the directions got messed up. And by testing it out with just real small groups, you can clear up all of those kinds of things. So I hope that you'll give this a try. Jeannie's article really explains well there in the handout. It was actually, she's talking about a program where she used this technique for us and used it. Now, my artist likes, and knows I like frogs. So you see here, just to help you remember, maybe we don't need 5 frogs to tell us what one frog could tell us. And so it's just a little way she illustrated that concept. So try to remember we could use single subject testing, or I actually would like you to mark on your handout how about 3 or 4 people, but we don't want more than that or else it turns into opening night like we would have with a play. Let me stop there and see if anybody's got a question about this concept of testing with real small groups.
Darryl, Ebony's asking, instead of the term pilot, and you're talking with clients about developmental testing, is that the term you actually use, or do you call it something else? You've mentioned opening night versus the dress rehearsal, for example.
Thanks. That's an excellent question. And you've got to be, it's real tricky here. You've got to be real careful with your customer, your client, about the use of words around this. I talk about, I don't use even the words developmental testing. We just want to try out the program and we just need a real small group to try it out on. When we are using the word pilot, I think of that word, and all the people that work for us, I emphasize that when you're using that word, think of it as opening night. Think of it as the first running of the program, because that's the way it's going to be treated by management, and that's the way it's going to be treated by the learner that comes to that pilot program, especially if it's going to have 15 or 20 people in it. So I only use the word pilot to mean, to us internally anyway, that that's the first running. And it's a tricky thing to work with your clients to make sure that they're only giving you a handful of students, but you can emphasize to them that we want to just make sure we're right before we are with a large group, because what happens is your client not only shows up, but their manager shows up too. After all, you've called it a pilot. They want to come and see what you've done. And they're excited about it, interested in it. And if it's not first class by the time you're doing something called a pilot in a company, you're probably going to get in trouble with it, and that's going to jeopardize all the hard work you've done to make that program and to try and get it right. So we like to do the small group testing.
And I think the term tryout is nice because you can conceivably do multiple tryouts if you feel the need.
Well, very important point. I agree. I like to use those words. And the other piece is how many tryouts do we need? Let me just explain something here. Whenever we try something out, we follow that by revisions, right? So when we make revisions, however, we've got to do something else. We don't know if our revisions worked or not. So we've got to try it out again. Okay? And when we try it out the second time, if we make revisions, any serious ones at least, we need to try it out still another time. So the tryout and revision cycle goes try out, revise, try out, revise, try out. It always ends with a tryout of the program. Now, here's why also small group testing or single subject testing is so important. It's the number of revision cycles you get through that improves the program, not how many people were tested in each cycle. So, if I were to take the approach, well, I'm going to try it out on, if this is for group instructor-led training, I want to try it out with 15 people. Well, if you're going to go through those cycles, what you're going to use up is 45 people. You'd have 15 in the first tryout. You'd make some revisions. You have to have 15 different people in the second tryout. You make some revisions, and you're going to have still another 15 people for the third tryout. If you're using single subject trials, or let's say we're trying it out with 3 people at a time, you've got 3, 3, and 3. 9 people instead of 45. Now you start to see the pure logistics of the matter. Let's say that when people are, the people that are going to take your program are located in different locations. Well, they've all got to come together if you're going to try it out with a large group. So this is why tryout and revision cycles don't occur. In other words, what happens is people put the training together and they just run it. They don't really go through this tryout revision cycle. One of the reasons is, logistically, it's difficult. If you use the small group testing, you know, you don't have to worry about getting a large classroom. It could occur in a little conference room. All of these logistical things fall into place. It's much faster. It's much easier. When we do it as a commercial company, selling our development services to a large corporation, when we say we're just going to try it out with 3 or 4 people, could they get us some samples from the target population? Then they can get them right there at headquarters. It's no problem. I say all we need is a little conference room, a screen to project any slides we've got, and so on and so forth. And you know what? Since it's so small, sometimes my client doesn't even show up to the first trial or 2, which is fabulous because we get a chance to get any bugs out of there. And so it helps us look good, too. When we're then going to the pilot, everybody looks good. By the time we get to, quote, the pilot, which, remember, I think is opening night, everything, almost everything is out of that program. Oh, you might find 1 or 2 things, but think about it. Now somebody's gone to that student that went to the, quote, the pilot now, opening night, comes back and says, you know, that was the first time they ran this program. I thought it was really great. And I didn't have to, we had one little thing that we found that they're going to fix, and it's a great situation. So now you've got 15 or 20 marketeers running back there saying how great the program is rather than the other way around. So that test, revision, test, cycle, or tryout, revision, tryout, revision, tryout, has to occur probably 3 different tryouts in order to get through just 2 sets of revision.
Mike is asking, you mentioned issues around participants taking information back to their peers.
Right.
Do you provide information or discussion that mitigates the information they take back?
Well, it's a good question. It's another thing that we have found in practice that happens, that's the benefit of the real small group tryouts at first. If you've only got 3 people, first of all, just conceptually, when they come there and you tell them this is just a test of the program, not you, and it's not ready for prime time yet, we're going to make changes to it based on what we learned from you going through it. When you do that, those people really believe it's a tryout. If you've got 20 people, it just doesn't work that way. Conceptually, they think it's the running of the program and that it's finished. And so that's the other, you bring up a reason why just 3 people, and they probably won't go back and say much of anything to anybody because they know they were just being used as sort of, pardon the term, but a guinea pig to test out the program. So they believe that this is going to be changed, that you're just doing it to make sure you get all the problems out of your program and that you've made improvements. And so it's only when you've got a large group that they start going back with some kind of marketing information, be it positive or be it negative.
Karen asks, when you're trying things out and two people have different opinions on what they're looking at, do you look for another subject, or what? How do you reconcile the two different takes on the same thing?
Well, that gets down to what kind of information do you gather in deciding whether a revision should occur or not. The question would, in my mind, and actually right at the end of the handout, there's an algorithm that I put together a long time ago that helps you to make that kind of decision. The first question is, does it have to do with the learning objectives? In other words, I might have somebody say, you know, I don't like the color of that guy's shirt. It's blue and I think it ought to be, you know, yellow. Does that have to do with the learning objectives? Probably not. Okay, so do we make that kind of revision? In other words, the point is that you don't make every revision that you hear about. You look at it as an instructional developer, you look at it in terms of the learning objectives, what impact does it have on that. Now, if there is something that is so sort of disturbing visually or something like that to the audience, whether it would, so much so that it would interfere with them accomplishing the learning objectives, then we'd want to make that kind of change. But if you get two people disagreeing, first ask yourself, does this have to do with the objectives at all? And then secondly, that's why the content person is involved too. Oftentimes in our tryouts, if we possibly can, in fact, the content expert is present. We may put the training on, and the reason for that is the content experts putting the training on, if it's instructor-led, tend to leave out your nice activities and practice, and they get off the program and take off on a tangent and stuff like that. And we want to run the program. What you're trying to do with tryout and revision is you're trying to create a standard way of running the program. That's what instructional systems development is really all about. It's to make sure that we've got a product that's reliable. It will get the same results each time that we run it, or nearly the same results each time we run it. And that's the whole reason for doing it. Hope that helps a little bit.
Scott says that in his organization we have a hard time getting people away from their jobs, and it's difficult to ask them to come back and participate in nearly the same program. And so he's wondering, do you put the people that you piloted through the finished program and assess them again as if they were already assessed, or can you take the assessment scores that they achieved during the pilot?
Okay, good question. There's that word pilot again. If we're just talking about the small group tryouts, then that's not nearly as big a problem as if you brought 20 people in 3 times, right? 20 different people each time, 60 people altogether. There it becomes a problem, right? So if you've just got, say, 3 people in each tryout, you've got better control over telling whether that person learned all they were supposed to learn, give them the assessment test, and we usually don't require them to come back to the program. Now, this has to do with how finished your instructional program was. I've got a slide up here right now that talks about the idea of trying now, to use your language, a prototype or one module, say, of the instruction in a small group, getting that, finding out all we can from just 1 or 2 modules, especially for large programs, and feeding that information forward to the instructional design team to say, you know, hey, this kind of thing doesn't work with the learners, or this really works well with the learners, so be sure you leave that in there. Or they seem to need more examples or more illustration to understand the concept. So we will oftentimes, on a large program, get 2 or 3 or 4 modules up, test those out, and get them up fast, test them out to see if there's patterns or anything that we can discover with the target audience representatives that would cause us to change the other, 90 other modules we're going to make or something. You don't want to wait until you've made that many modules to find out that, something you've done in almost every one of them just really doesn't work with the audience. So that's a partial answer to this anyway. It's back to the small groups is a better situation. Most of the time, when we've got the whole program together and we're trying it out, or it is an actual pilot, then we don't require those people. Usually not that much is wrong with the program by then, and we don't require those people to come to another class. If certification's a real big deal, then they would still have to pass the performance certification test. But they would not have to come to another class usually.
Lorraine is looking at the description of developmental testing that appears on page 268 of the handout. And this third and the fourth bullet talk about logistical problems and typographical or other kinds of production errors. And she's wondering why there might be problems at such a late stage. Shouldn't these errors have been detected earlier in the development of the training? They seem to be things an editor may have reviewed for earlier.
Yeah. Well, good point. At what point do you say it's finished? And if you've done much production work, it's surprising. We'll take a brochure, and that's a pretty dangerous place to have an error, right? It's amazing how you'll get the final copy back from printing and go, oh my gosh, we've got a misspelled word. I don't know, even though an editor looked at it. So it's just the idea that you still try to catch anything that's like that. Obviously, it'd be good that they're not in there to begin with one possible exception. This comes to how you interact with the people that you're trying the materials out with. We have, for example, on purpose, put a couple errors in text or something right up front in an instructional program so that the learner goes, oh, you know what, there's a word left out here, or there's the wrong word here, or there's a misspelled word. So we can turn around and reinforce them. We go, oh, that's really good. Thanks. We got that. We write it down. That's exactly what we're looking for. If you find out anything else, why, let us know. Now we're going to go right back to the program and get back in the role of you're the student. So sometimes we even get a little tricky and help the learner to see that it's okay to tell us something's wrong. But by and large, by the time we are to the pilot, hopefully that's not happening at all. You're right. Logistical things, as we go to the pilot, one of the things you may find then, if you've got, say you've got the class's normal size but is going to be 20, and we have 20 people now, but we were testing it out on 3 or 4, we may find some logistical things that don't work so well with 20 people, and we may need to make a few changes. So that's the other piece to it. All right. So you can see here from this slide that we suggest that if it's 2 days or less for instructor-led training, that you try to run it through with and wherever you see single subject testing, I really do encourage you to mark that 3 or 4 people. We've tried out with a real small group. Although if you're using prototyping the way that you're using it in your classroom where it's really rough, that could be just, you could just check it with one person. And sometimes there we're even checking it with people who are similar to the target audience, but maybe aren't even the target audience in the very early stages, just to see if the directions are clear for something, can they understand what you've got there, and so forth. So it could even be used that way. But we use the tryout revision cycles as very small groups. If it's 2 days or less, if it's more than 2 days, as I mentioned before, we might, or if it's long one, we might create a few modules and test those out, feed the information forward. If it's more than 2 days, we might also do something for instructor-led that's like a run-through of the program, where we don't present all the content, but we do walk through the program with some learners. We might test any high-risk activities, such as a role play or a small group activity, where the directions might confuse people or something. We test those out in their full form. And of course, that last one, if it's real long, we feed the information forward from some early tests. Okay, let me just mention something else in your handout that I think you'll find very, very useful as a job aid. This is on how to brief your learners and debrief your learners. And this is just past, let's see, I'll get your page number here. It's page 276 in the module that's from our Instructional Developer Workshop. And here's how to brief the learners, and we've even given you some sample paragraphs of what you say something like what we've got there. So the different categories are, you need to describe the intended scenario for the materials. This is normally meant for maybe 30 people or whatever, okay? And that's pretty self-explanatory. I use this job aid cell myself today just to remind myself not to leave anything out when I'm going to help run a tryout and revision test. So you'll find there an actual sort of script that you can modify, and it's on the next about 3 or 4 pages there about how you brief the learners, how you, what you do during the tryout, and how you debrief the learners. And then another job aid that we think you'll find very handy is on page 281 and continues on 282 and 83. And it's a questionnaire so that you can hand out after a training module, even if you're just testing one module. And it's constructed in such a way that each statement is positive. For example, if you look at the first one on 281, it says the directions provided me with enough information to use the module properly. Well, since we're looking to see if anything's wrong with our program and needs to be fixed, I'm only interested in their answer if they disagree. And then we've got the little part, well, if you disagree, tell us why. And this is where you'll get some detail out of them. They might say, for example, in that first one, asking about directions, they might say, oh, the directions for that case study were a little bit confusing. And so when you say, you know, when they say the case study and the directions for it, you know exactly what they're talking about, and not all the directions of the program, just the directions on the case study. So if you use this questionnaire, I really encourage you to keep it in this form. So when they disagree, they tell you why. It will help you to pinpoint information that was a problem within your instructional module. Now, speaking of the questionnaire and the kinds of information that we should collect, let's take a look at that just for a second. But it's very important. Sometimes we get to picking information or doing information. This is on page 280. On page 280, 3 important types of data to collect. Which things are more important than others. Students' written responses. If you've got worksheets and that sort of thing, you really want to pick those up. Okay? Students' spoken comments and nonverbal reactions too. But there's some things that we need to do for sure, and that is that we need to test the learning objectives. That's called criterion reference testing. Testing test items and performance checklists and that sort of thing based on the actual objectives of the program. The questionnaire, I've given you a sample of one there on page 281. You're welcome to modify that in any way, add, delete, but try to keep it in the same form as I mentioned. And we give that out, and then we verbally debrief. So we make sure verbal debriefing, especially if it is a group, even a small group like 3 or 4 people, is the last thing we do so that one person doesn't influence another person. And then here's that algorithm that I mentioned earlier about which revision. So now you've collected all this information, and what you've got now is the question, well, which revisions do we do and which ones do we not do. You probably can't revise everything that every person that took the program mentioned, and it wouldn't make sense. Pretty soon you are destroying the integrity probably of the program itself by trying to do that. So here is an algorithm on page 284 that really emphasizes the, did they learn what it was they came to the instructional program to learn? In other words, does the revision affect the learning objectives is our first question. And you'll see if you follow that through some ideas of what you do in that case. If you say, well, no, it really doesn't affect the objectives. They did fine on the criterion reference test. Well, then you say, well, is there some other reason that the problem is serious? And if it is, can I fix it? Maybe you made a video, and to go back and reshoot it and so on and so forth would be very, very costly. And you say, it's just not that serious of a problem. We're just going to leave it in there. Or we're going to do something different in the handout or something of that nature that's easier to do as a revision. So this also helps. I found this to help a group or a team that is tasked with deciding what will be revised and what won't be. And so I give them this algorithm and kind of explain it, that not all revisions would be made. And as a team of designers, content experts, and other important stakeholders, we would decide together using this algorithm. All right. So here's a little idea of reflecting at this point, if you will. Given what we've said so far, what ideas have maybe emerged for you and any takeaways that you would have. And I'm going to pause here just momentarily for you to jot down quickly, if you will, because I still want to show you a couple examples of actual projects where we tried things out. So I'm going to pause just for 2 minutes.
And while people are reflecting and writing things down, I just wanted to thank you very much for sharing these really cool materials with us. These are really helpful in that, you've got great job aids here, whether you're using these as part of a tryout or a developmental test. These are great ideas in here and really useful materials. Thank you so much. That's very gracious of you.
You're very welcome.
I love the module questionnaire as well, especially that little trick of if you disagree, why? What a great way to collect data.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah.
People are sharing some of their reflections. Ebony posted terminology when speaking with the client is very important in terms of pilot versus tryout. Single testers can be more impactful than a group. Karen wrote, it has helped me to reflect back on my prior experience in the earlier ID course and think on how I could have improved parts of the training if I had used these development tests early on. Mike wrote about how you pitch the long-term time required for, this is a question. I'll come back to that in just a sec. Lorraine wrote her takeaway is try out on a single person, make revisions, try out on a different person, etc. Pointing out that the purpose of the test is to test the program, not the guinea pig. And yep. Mike asked, how do you pitch the long-term time required for multiple trials and revision phases to your clients?
All right, let me answer that one. If you're using the very small group testing, perhaps as small as one person, let's say you've got a half-day instructor-led program, just to take an example. All right, so what we will do, we'll set up a tryout just in a little conference room, you know, and this is no trouble then for your client to get us a little conference room. We don't have to have one of their regular classrooms that's really busy. We get a little conference room, and so on a Tuesday morning, we test out the program, let's say, with 3 people. Okay? We run clear through the program. We gather any worksheets and so forth. We give them the criterion reference test. We give them the questionnaire. We verbally debrief. We collect all the information and thank them. We already have set up, knowing that we will have revisions to make, we've already set up for Wednesday morning a second group. And for that matter, Friday morning, a third group. And in between Tuesday afternoon and Wednesday afternoon, we quickly make revisions based on what we learned, any revisions we're going to make. So that the next day, when we're testing it the second time, we're testing those revisions and make any final tweaks Wednesday afternoon or on Thursday. we make the revisions quickly again, and on Thursday morning we run the test again, and by then hopefully there are no more changes, or if there are changes, they're so small we don't have to retest the program. Maybe it's a typo or something like that, we're ready to go then to the pilot program. So we polish it up after that. So we've done all of our tryout revisions within about a 3-day span, and without making our clients crazy, like trying to fly in 10 people or something to run the class. And we're ready now for them to fly in the whole world, maybe the following week even, on a short program like that. So you're making, again, a case for the very small group tryouts because they can be done faster, better, easier.
Scott reflected that he doesn't need to run people who piloted the training through assessments again unless there's certification issues.
Right.
Susan noted or reflected on the importance of allowing time in the development cycle to make tryouts possible, which is what you just explained.
Yeah, start talking about that right away with your customer, so that, or your client, so that they're expecting it, and that timelines are allowing for that, and allowing for final production also. That means duplication and all that.
And the Ebony loves the script that you provided, and she wonders whether you stick to the script or ad-lib a little bit.
Oh, I ad-lib a little bit, but it reminds me of the things I ought to accomplish. I'll say it in my own words, you know. I won't write it out. It's just I wrote one out just to give you an idea of it. In other words, say something like what I have there, but make it your own.
Lorraine was wondering if you ever have tryout subjects that feel inadequate because they're not finding enough problems.
Oh, interesting. I don't think no. Now,
I know,
you know what, though? I'm going to back up there. I want to just mention this. How you brief them is very important. Here's what you do not want to do. Do not want to do. To tell them to find all the problems they can possibly find. That's a bad thing to do.
Amen.
Because you set the person up to do exactly that, and they think their job is to find something wrong with it. If nothing's wrong with it, that's fine. Can they go through it, learn, and do well on the test? And well, great, you got it right the first time. Usually there's something that we find, the directions for some activity or something like that could be improved upon, but don't set them up to be critics of your work. They're simply trying to see if they can learn using your instructional program.
Right, and what we found is if we accidentally reinforce the try to break it, they would find ways to do that that were so off base that no one on the job would ever have the time or the inclination to do what they did.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. That's real important that they should be playing the role of actual students going through the program. Okay, so I do have time to show you just a couple quick examples because I think they're neat. This is a very current project, actually, that we've just finished, and it's a blended learning example, and it's a large equipment manufacturer. And so we have a lab course that's all troubleshooting. And so very, very hands-on. That's what you see on the right-hand side there. But prior to that, people took the e-learning program. Now, the tryout revision of these, there were 8 e-learning courses, real short courses, about 15 to 20 minutes long, and then a 2-day instructor-directed lab. And in order to get the lab to be, the reason the e-learning exists is in order to get the lab almost entirely hands-on, no lecture, hands-on activities of troubleshooting, because that's what the job is really like. That's why the e-learning was invented. But we use these exact same strategies that we've been talking about here. We created, we even took it on and did a level 3 evaluation in this case, where we went out, this is Venezuela actually, out in the field and checked off and observed, were they doing it like they were taught in the classroom? And I put this up because we still may get information for the purpose of revision doing, quote, a level 3 evaluation. That is, once they're back on the job, are they doing it the way they were taught to do it and to the standards? And there may be something about the training program that could be improved. Often it's a lot of other problems of why they're not using it and using it the way you taught them. But there could be some that go back to the training program. So this continuous improvement of the program formative evaluation can even occur after the training's over and you're looking in the field, did they use it the way they were taught? Now, let me show you how we prototype sometimes our storyboards for e-learning. And we have a tips newsletter you might all want to sign up for. Just go to our home page to sign up for it. But this is a direct link to an archive of tips. And one is called Rapid Storyboarding. And it explains the process that I'm about to illustrate in detail. And what we do is we actually create storyboards in Word. And so let me show you a couple. This is one here. This is actually not the program itself. This is a Word document. And what we do is we create a shadow template in the background, and then we can put the text, and if we've got a drawing, we throw it in there, and then we can number it. And it's not perfect, but it gives us storyboards that we can actually try out using single subject tryouts and see if it's working. So they might, here you see that it's even a little bit off of where it's exactly supposed to be. The other real advantage of this is the content experts can look at these things and make any changes in a markup, and you can see what they changed, and if there's controversy over it, resolve that controversy. And so it works both as a way to get fast storyboards together and let content experts help with the narration and gathering the photographs. And let's say they look at that photograph and they say, "Oh, that's the wrong machine." "Oh, okay. Well, can you get a photograph of the right machine?" And that actually does happen. These are just a series then of 3 frames from storyboards that ended up being in the program, but we did the prototype first, as you're seeing here. And if you like that idea, then take a look at that tip, and it'll tell you how to do that with Word, Microsoft Word.
Darryl?
Yeah.
Do you also have templates set up for things like different sorts of interactions, like multiple choice questions or drag and drops and so on?
We do. Our programmers will then create certain patterns for those kinds of things, and we found in very large projects, and especially if translation's an issue, it's really important to set, like if you're having matching questions, that each matching question, the directions for it are the same. You know, you're supposed to match the items in column A with column B by putting the number in column A into the space in column B, something like that. But it's the same setup every time. This facilitates translation because the directions will be the same. And it also doesn't confuse the learner that it's suddenly, like in the case of matching, the columns are reversed and you're supposed to do something differently. But we're not trying to test, you know, they're paying attention to the directions, but rather if they learned or not. So we do that. We do create patterns like that for any given project. And of course, those become reusable objects too for future programs. Here's an instructor-led one, and I did send you a handout of a module that it's a nearly final, ready certainly ready for tryout, but also ready to show your client what you've got in mind for the project. And if you took a look at that, for example, you'll see the topic is delegation. And this is very closely tied to a business reason that these managers need to do this. They were homegrown managers, and they kept doing the technical work so much so that once they became a manager, they wouldn't delegate to their teams. They just kept doing the technical work, so the team really didn't do anything. And people high up in the company said if they don't stop that, they're going to get fired. So it was a real business problem and need. But so we have the delegation module, and if you look at the slide part, it's just text right now. But that's fine for a prototype. They can certainly get the idea of what we're going to do. Now, you want to do embellishment here with visuals and that sort of thing, fine, you do that for the final product, but not until you're sure that this is pretty much what you're going to teach. So you can look at it this way. We find that when we work in a commercial environment, that we cannot give our clients and our stakeholders anything that's very, very rough. We can do that with our own development team, and I think Steve has been encouraging you to do that. But not with your stakeholders and clients. If you show them something really rough, for some reason, the vast majority of them will think that's what you have in mind for the final product. And because of that, you'll get a really bad reaction. So when we're showing something to a sponsor client, it's almost final form, so that they really get a feel for what this is like. Because after all, what we're really wanting to have happen is we're wanting them to say, yes, you're on the right track, or no, you're not. And if not, then what? But if you have it really sloppy, including those things you were talking about earlier, typos and so on and so forth, it's sloppy in any way, we found a really bad reaction. They may say, stop the whole project, you know. So we just don't go there. I don't let my developers turn something into a client that's messy. That's why I always look at anything they're going to give a client. All right, so that you've got some examples there of what a prototype for an instructor-led program might look like. And I will admit that that's a pretty polished prototype, but you can create examples up front like that. One example, this is in general what the module's going to look like that we're going to make. This is 1 out of 10 modules in the program. Usually comes along with the design document, which is a report of the business needs, the key objectives for the whole program, the target audience, the context, all those things. And then we say, here's the sample module. That's our prototype. Here's the sample module that shows all the elements that will go into each module. Notice there's an introduction, there's objectives, there's practice activities. And we walk the person through this and make sure we're on the same wavelength, as well as that module can be used to try out and see how it works with the learners right away. So I guess my time is up. This last slide is to ask you to continue to think about what you've seen here. For example, you may say, oh, with the rest of the program here, I want to take a look at that really fast storyboarding idea. Looks like that would be a fast way to get storyboards together, and also to even test them out with the idea of single subject tryouts. So thanks very much for having us this morning, and I hope the hour has been helpful. Some of the job aids that we've sent along, please don't hesitate to contact us with further questions.
Darryl, there are a few more questions. Would you have time to?
Stay on.
Okay. Susan noted that another reason for the tryout approach is that there are going to be fewer costs involved to the client, not only in terms of travel, but reprinting materials and so on. She's wondering if you include revisions based on the tryouts as part of the contract to develop the materials.
I absolutely do, and I think any instructional design firm that does not include that in their fixed price bid is something less than legitimate. It is probably the place in the entire design and development process where we lend science to it. That is, we're going to test it out to see if it works or not. And that is always, going through those cycles is always a part of our fixed price bid when we're doing a custom project. And it is a nasty trick that some companies do, is they make the program and, you know, it goes to the first tryout, what we would call a tryout, goes for the first running, and they have problems, and that company goes back to the sponsor and says, well, yeah, we can fix that. Here's how much money it'll cost to fix it. We take the approach, you hired us to get it right. And so getting it right means the students learned what they were supposed to learn, the program worked for them, and so all those revisions are part of our upfront agreement.
And that's how we looked at life at DLS Group during my consulting time as well.
Good.
Like you said, I'd be very leery of anyone who wasn't doing this. Mike is wondering, in e-learning projects, what comes first, your storyboards or the prototype?
Well, I didn't spend a lot of time on that. Maybe a little more complicated. What we'll often do, if a company does not already have a look and feel for their e-learning programs, the one that you saw already did, in fact, you could probably tell that's Caterpillar there. They have about 5 templates, if you will, internally, and you're supposed to work within those. You can pick whichever one you want. Some of them are more free-flowing, you know, you can move around the program more. Others, you kind of have to go through the program in a structured way. And so as a team up front, we select the one that's right for the kind of program we're putting together. Will give us the flexibility that's needed, or have the controls that we think are needed. And so one is picked. Now, if we're working with a relatively new company and say that they don't have a look and feel to their thing, what we do is we actually create about 3 different looks and feels with our graphics people and web design people for them, using like their company colors and things like that. And we get approval of a look and feel, and we'll do that on like what an opening screen is going to look like, what an interactive screen is going to look like, and maybe 4 or 5 screens. And once they select the one they like the best, or maybe it's some combination of 2 or all 3 of them that they like, say color schemes or something like that. And once that's done, then we create the template that can be used for the storyboarding. But if a customer already has that sort of thing, then obviously we work within their already existing template. And that was the case with the example you just saw. We did not create that. They did. So I hope that answers that question.
So to paraphrase a question that Mike has, it seems that the answer to a great extent is like a lot of other ID type questions in terms of it depends. And with a client with whom you don't have a history, some of the earlier prototypes might occur relatively early in your instructional design effort, around early design. And if you have a track record with that client, then it sounds like you know enough to know what some of the storyboards look like, and those become part of your initial tryouts. And do tryouts always happen as part of development?
Yeah, they do. During development, and the quicker the better.
Right.
But let me go back to the first part of that. If I've got a relatively naive client, yes, I want to show them something as quickly as I can, but it must be polished. It must be polished with that naive client. There is where, for sure, somebody's going to say, that's what my end product's going to look like, those funny little sketches. It's got to really be polished. So we'll put a whole module together if we've got a real naive client and really have it looking marvelous before we show it to them. We might, sketch out things ourselves in a relatively free-flowing way at first, but we will polish that up before that naive client ever sees it, because they'll just jump to the conclusion that's what they're going to get. With more experienced people, another question I'd have there, every new project, a new project, even if it's with the same individual within a company. Now, just because, Caterpillar is a large client of ours, but, we may be dealing with the same person that we dealt with before, or maybe a different person altogether. You've got to back up and start over. If it's a different person, you've got to treat that almost like it's a new client. And also, even with one that has worked with us in the past, I still am cautious about how we get started and making sure that they get an idea of what we're going to be doing. Much involvement there as we can, that they have agreed that we're on the right track and that sort of thing.
And I think this is, your comments point out how formative evaluation is wrapped throughout any of these instructional design models, whether you have something that's relatively linear or you have something with more things going on in parallel. The idea is that we make informed design decisions based on data that we're collecting at appropriate points in the process.
Yeah, it does happen all the way along. I mean, you might start a project up and start to get into, somebody's made a training development request, and when you get into it, you find that it's really not something training can help with. The real issue or problem or opportunity requires other solutions rather than training, or at least in addition to training. And so right there, if it's training that is not really needed, we make a total summative decision about the training program itself and say we're not making one. It's a no answer. And we're going to make these other things that will help more. Now, I don't say let me hasten to add, you don't just say no to the client. If that's just working with them, you come to a joint decision that training is not the best solution. There's another solution to the problem. So it could happen that early. But as we're actually getting into making something, the quicker we can test a part of it out, the better. This does some project management things too. If any of you have worked in development for a while or with other instructional designers and you've got a whole team of people, you want to know if you've got any problems on that team. Whenever we do a project, depending upon the size of it, we may have as many as 4 or 5 instructional designers. And I want to make sure everybody's up and running and doing what they're supposed to. So I will make a requirement of each designer to put together, you can call it a prototype, but a sample module with their content expert within about 3 weeks of the start of the project, even though it's a big project. And they may moan and groan a little bit, but I'll tell you, it's the proof's in the pudding. and what happens there is I notice if I've got any designer that's got some kind of issue, isn't up to the task, or if we've got an issue with a content expert, and so it gives me as the overall manager or our project manager an idea right away of any difficulties we have before we get 3 months into a project or something. So it's got lots of advantages in addition to the tryout revision stuff.
That's a cool idea. The other thing that's neat about that is you can get all of those different things done early in a way where you could potentially take the best of each one of those efforts and use that to create the template, the design standards, and so on for the rest of that team, and it really employs the best of what everyone's offered.
Yeah, I have done that, and it'll also, if people keep track of their time, then we can begin to see what it's going to take if we do one thing or another thing. We may find that, gee, getting that first one together took, the way we were doing it takes far too long. And we've got to find some sort of a way of shortcutting that time frame, or we're never going to get the project done in the time required or budget required. So all those things pop up if you see stuff from a management point of view right away. You could have an individual that, too, it's not happened to me but once or twice, but an instructional designer that was maybe going through a rough time of life, whatever. You'll notice, gee, they usually perform pretty well, and they're late getting this first module in, and gee, it came in and it looks pretty bad. And so I'll immediately call them. And I'm usually working with people that I've worked with before. This is a real case that I'm thinking of. And the person said, well, guys, you're right. My husband's brother just passed away, and he had 3 kids, and they were divorced, and we're having to share the children amongst the family. I said, would you like to get off of this project, and I can put somebody else on it? But I knew that right away, and they said yes. I knew that right away because we did this so early in the project, and it was almost transparent to my client. I pulled in another developer, got them going quickly, and there was not any loss in time or delay in the project.
Darryl, that's all the questions that people have posted, so I wanted to thank you again for sharing your expertise with us. Thank you again for your agreement to let us record this webinar and your agreement that at some point we'll post the webinar as well as the materials you provided publicly on our revised IPT website. So once again, thank you for your support for our students and your support for our program.
Oh, you're most welcome. It's always a delight. And please, any of you contact me anytime. If you've got a question you think I could help with, I'm happy to try to help out that way too. And Steve, thanks very much for your confidence, and we'll see you soon.
Indeed. And this concludes our webinar. Thank you all for attending.